Welcome to my American History Notes, where I discuss the conclusions I've drawn from my study of American history. Now, I've used trusted historians. I've tried to follow up on the primary sources they list when those sources are available to me. A primary source would be like a letter, a journal, a news article, newspaper article, a law, something that you can look at that's actual, like you would look at what did the Confederate leadership say about why they were going to fight before the Civil War and compare it to what they said why they fought after the Civil War. So you get a little bit of truth about what's going on. So we look at those things and trusted historians, people who don't seem to have an agenda. I've read several books where they were clearly had an agenda, um, and so we're going to discuss this. You don't have to agree with my conclusions, but I do ask you to study and know about these events and people on your own. So let's begin here. Um, in the North, this is my thoughts on some more thoughts on slavery. In the North, New York had the largest population of Black people, with around 20,000 out of a total population of about 208,000 in 1771. Slaves here rebelled even more than in the South. There was a panic in New York City in 1741, which surpassed the Salem witch hunt for sheer brutality and terror. Several unexplained fires were blamed on slaves who were supposedly conspiring with poor whites to burn the city. After a number of wildly emotional trials, 101 Black people and 4 whites were convicted of criminal arson. 13 Blacks were burned alive, and 18 Blacks and 4 white people were hanged. Now, all of the New England colonies contained Black people. Massachusetts had the most, with around 5,000 out of a total population of 224,000 in 1746. Rhode Island had the largest proportion, with around 3,000 out of 31,500 in 1749. Sadly, the state that helped establish freedom of religion in our country was the center of the colony's slave trade. That is Newport, Rhode Island. The Royal African Company of London handled most of the slave trade, however, but every English seaport in the Americas, from Baltimore to Barbados, participated, with African slaves being traded for rum, salt codfish, and Spanish dollars. The prohibition against slavery in Georgia, which there was a prohibition against slavery, but that was repealed in 1750. And Englishmen claimed that they could not support the colony without rum and slaves. A number of colonists abandoning their land and moving to South Carolina, where a white man could make great fortunes in rice and indigo. Even with the repeal by 1752, Georgia only had around 1,700 white and 350 Black inhabitants. Slave traders made fortunes that rivaled any computer tycoon of today. In Africa, for instance, in 1750, according to Hugh Thomas in his monumental book, The Slave Trade, an African king uh, had a greater income from slavery than any duke in England. So there was huge fortunes made in Africa, and there was huge fortunes made in the Western Hemisphere, and in England and in Europe. It was a huge criminal enterprise, let's say. Slave traders made fortunes that rivaled any computer tycoon of today. In South Carolina, Henry Lawrence and his chief rival, Samuel Brailsford, owned numerous plantations in the mid 1700s, according to Hugh Thomas's The Slave Trade. Every Christian denomination was involved in the trade, with the dominating religion in each port deciding the religious complexion of the merchants. Anglicans, Catholics, and other Protestants were all involved in making merchandise of other human beings and using them as brute labor, in spite of 1 Timothy 1:10 and the book of Philemon. As Christians do today to justify their publicly accepted sins, it was simply a matter of saying that the Bible didn't mean exactly what it said, but rather something else. Even Quakers were involved in the trade, especially in Newport, Rhode Island. However, Christian voices were always heard against slavery. As unpopular as they were, these voices rose to a crescendo after our revolution. There are many great sermons against slavery, but one of the best is by John Wesley, friend of George Whitefield, founder of the Methodist, one of the founders of the Methodist denomination. While many of our founding fathers regarded slaves as either less than human or a lower state of humanity, others did not hold such a view. Methodists were prominent in the abolition movement. Slavery, economically like easy credit after World War II in the 20th century, made unnatural growth possible in the colonies by using forced servitude as brute animal labor. And like easy credit, as we will see, created an attitude of dependency on the system and a disconnect between the biblical New Testament moral values and practice. Now, what I'd like you to do, I don't want to post it. I want to read it myself here for you because it will be impossible to pay attention. I'd like you to go to the internet and type in John Wesley Thoughts Upon Slavery. He published it in 1774, and it's a great sermon speech essay. And he begins with, by slavery, I mean domestic slavery as that of a servant to master. And he gives a tremendously wonderful exposition on slavery and his objection to it. It's free online. I just hope that you will look it up. Next time I'm going to begin discussing, because I'm a Baptist, I'm going to begin discussing how the Baptists in America who started out being opposed to slavery wound up being supporters of it, especially in the South. And I wrote an essay on that. I'm going to review that starting next time, and we'll continue it, our discussion of slavery, and then we can move on to other events. Thank you for listening.